Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Leanne Camara, the CEO of the New Bedford Light. Normally, our editor, Andy Tomalonis, opens these community conversations, but unfortunately, he is not feeling well and had to stay home tonight. So I'm going to be doing the introduction, and Adam Goldstein is going to be moderating for us. So before we get started, many of you may already be familiar with the New Bedford Light, but I wanted to share a brief history of our mission. We were founded in 2021 with a clear goal to provide essential local news that is free and independent. We cover a wide range of topics, including the environment, education, housing, fishing industry, offshore wind, and more, including the arts. The community conversation, which tonight's event is part of, is a reflection of the Light's commitment to fostering meaningful dialogue around key issues impacting our area. These events bring together experts, community leaders, and residents to engage in open and informed discussions. The goal is to create a space where community members can ask questions, offer ideas, and better understand the complex issues shaping the South Coast. Your moderator will be Adam Goldstein, our climate and environment reporter, who recently wrote The Cost of a Clean Bay. Adam is part of Report for America, which is a national service program that places journalists in local newsrooms to cover underreported topics. So with that, I'll hand it over to Adam to introduce our panelists and to begin tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Leanne, for such a lovely introduction. It's really great to see everyone's faces. My last one of these got derailed with COVID, so it's great to know I have readers and people who really care about and are passionate about these environmental issues. I think it's really encouraging to see. And so just for a few short words just about our community conversations, I mean, as Leanne mentioned, these are deeply researched, fact-based articles that we're hoping to, open up a dialogue with the greater community. Tonight's subject, obviously, as many of you read, or some of you may not have, but it's all good, is sewer systems and septic systems around the South Coast. Obviously, nitrogen pollution, a nutrient, has been plaguing the waters of Buzzards Bay for decades now, and I'm really excited to have some of these leaders from the South Coast community here with me tonight to talk about them. So let's start at the end of the line. We have Corin Peterson, who's the Vice President for Clean Water Advocacy at the Buzzards Bay Coalition. She's worked with town, state, and local officials on ways to improve water quality, including recent legislation establishing a financial aid program for those who want to upgrade their septic systems to denitrification models. On the left is Rob Almy, our chairman of the Dartmouth Board of Public Works and a member of the town's long-range capital planning committee. Dartmouth is working to improve its sewage treatment plant right now. They're undergoing an evaluation, and it's also weighing the costs of future sewer upgrades and expansions, with the other day-to-day costs of managing a town, like school repairs, bridge projects, other work. Next to him, we have Vinnie Furtado, who is the superintendent of the Board of Public Works in Fairhaven, or for the Department of Public Works in Fairhaven, rather, where contractors right now are working on a $70 million upgrade to the town's sewage treatment plant designed to reduce nitrogen from treated sewage. And we also have Bob Daler, who is our vice chairman of the Westport Planning Board and the Infrastructure Oversight Committee. Westport voters recently shot down a proposal to install sewerage on Route 6, which is a major project, $35 million, but we'll circle back around to that because obviously there's more to come on that. And so just to get started, for the record, this event is going to be recorded on video and posted on our website. That process generally takes a few days. I'm going to start with some questions for our panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to you guys to ask your questions about what's going on with the nitrogen pollution and, human waste issues in Buzzards Bay. So we ask that when you get a chance to talk, you speak with the microphone, identify yourself with your name and the community where you live, and then get right to the question. So I think there's a lot of questions about, the nitrogen and sewage and septic issues that face the region, but I just kind of wanted to give a brief background on, the issue more at large in Buzzards Bay. And so I think we're going to start with Corin Peterson to open things up. And so, Corin, can you talk a bit about, why are we sewering? Let's talk about the longer term history of, nitrogen pollution in the bay and what we're seeing. I mean, is this an aesthetic issue? And I'd love if you can give us a little bit of background on the challenges that we're facing.
Sure. Thank you, Adam, and thank you to the New Bedford Light for providing us this forum to have this really important community discussion. So what is nitrogen and why it's a problem for Buzzards Bay? Nitrogen is a nutrient. It makes things grow. When nitrogen gets into Buzzards Bay, it fertilizes opportunistic algae in the water and causes rapid algae blooms, which make our Buzzards Bay waters cloudy and murky. When the waters become cloudy and murky and they're filled with all this algae, it prevents the sunlight from penetrating the water and reaching the eelgrass, a super important habitat for all of our marine life in Buzzards Bay. Eelgrass is a habitat for our crabs, our shellfish, our small finfish, a very important juvenile habitat for our juvenile fish as they grow and they feed the food chain. So when the light can't get to the eelgrass because of algae blooms in the water, we start to lose our eelgrass beds. So we lose this habitat. And when we lose this habitat, we lose the foundation of our ecosystems in the bay. So that's the first problem with nitrogen pollution. The coalition has been monitoring water quality throughout Buzzards Bay at more than 200 sites for more than 30 years, watching nitrogen-related parameters in our estuaries. When you have all of this algae in our waters, in addition to the eelgrass going away and our small critter marine life going away, you have huge periods of oxygen depletion. So at nighttime, when all of this algae is in the water, it consumes the available oxygen, and it doesn't leave any oxygen for the other marine life that are in the water. And so you have these low oxygen environments that aren't, they aren't providing a nice habitat for the marine life. And in extreme events, you will have the oxygen levels drop so quickly that it will cause fish kills, which have occurred in Buzzards Bay over the years, that the fish can't actually get out of that area fast enough to find oxygen. And so these big algae blooms caused by nitrogen pollution are depleting oxygen in our waters. Is that a good foundation? It's a good place to start?
Perfect place to start.
Okay.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question. I know that, the Buzzards Bay Coalition has done some research, and they've found that, wastewater is the large contributor to nitrogen pollution in Buzzards Bay, or the largest, between septic systems and wastewater treatment facilities. And I'm curious if you can speak a bit to, some of the science underlying, those numbers and where we're getting those and how we know septic systems are really the problem here.
Sure. So decades of science from, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution to UMass Dartmouth School of Marine Science and Technology, all the science verified by the state Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency have, study after study have looked at all of the sources of nitrogen, including stormwater, fertilizer, wastewater from septic systems, wastewater from wastewater treatment facilities, and they do the site-specific analysis for each of the estuaries around Buzzards Bay, whether it's the Westport River or Slocum's River or New Bedford Harbor, and they do a land use analysis and they count up every square foot of pavement and they assign, we know X amount of nitrogen is coming off of that pavement. We know we can measure the nitrogen coming out of a septic system. We know the concentration of that. We know the concentration coming out of wastewater treatment facilities. And the scientists can tell us, and this is all state and federally verified, how much nitrogen is coming from each sources. And generally speaking, wastewater from septic systems is the largest source of nitrogen in Buzzards Bay.
Certainly, certainly. Corin, thank you so much for
My
the
pleasure.
background. And Bob, Corin just mentioned the Westport River, and obviously you guys have a number of septic systems in Westport, and I'm curious if you can, give the public a bit of the background on the challenges you guys are facing with septic systems in Westport and your efforts, sewer the town and the EPA and DEP's, action to, put this nitrogen pollution reduction target in your guys' court.
Yes, probably a little background would be helpful about Westport. Unlike some of the other speakers, we have very little public water. There's a little stretch of public water in Route 6. We have no public sewers. We have no engineering department. We have no public works department. We do have a highway surveyor, and we have, he has 6 people on his staff. The town is geographically large, like Dartmouth. We're roughly 12 miles north to south and 5 miles wide. So we have a lot to do, and we sort of live on a volunteer basis. The water quality impacts that we see are largely from septic systems. So virtually the entire town is in septic systems. The majority of people in the town have private wells, and that has been the way things are for a long time, and the way a lot of people in the town would like to keep things that way. So we have about 8,000 septic systems, all which contribute to nitrogen degradation in the river. And we have all of the things that, and from out of the river and directly into, both into the bay and we actually front on Rhode Island Sound. So the river is an enormous resource. It is a shellfish. We have oysters, we use scallops, we have hard-shell clams, quahogs, and our beds are still open. We grow oysters in the bed, and our land use threatens all of those activities in the fisheries itself. Agriculture is both a decreasing occupation in town, but had been a significant occupation. And not only is agriculture decreasing, but they're improving their manure management methods and the way they rotate crops and all of that. So our load from agriculture, the runoff on the land, is reducing. We have taken the opportunities with grant money to advance and prepare for the enforcement action that we know that we will face, because the Westport River is such an important estuary that it has already a TMDL limit set on it. So the town of Westport has an obligation to meet and the water quality standards for nitrogen in the river. And right now, the river doesn't meet those standards. So we have that obligation. And we, enforcement that's going on the Cape right now was deferred on Westport and on Dartmouth, but will come around. I think in general, the voters in Westport don't believe that enforcement is going to happen, or they'll be able to dodge it somehow. So the town has acted in what it can do. So it took ARPA money and grant money. We designed water and sewer systems all the way in Route 6, which would be the core, which is the most densely developed area. We did that at no cost to the taxpayers. We are about to take the land necessary for our critical connection to Fall River. For us, the solution, which is really the enormously beneficial solution to the bay, is that we would we would take a sewer system in North Westport and connect it to Fall River. Fall River's system was designed for a population when the mills were all running, and they have capacity. So they have capacity, they need customers, we have a need, we eventually will need sewers. So there is really an opportunity to have that work to a regional benefit. We've done what we can do. We got bids on the sewers that we designed. The bids were all below the engineer's estimate. We had grants and monies in place, and the voters in the town turned down the bids for the sewer. So we'll have to go back into the fight, and on what we can do within our own authority. We have adopted all the regulation that all new septic systems in the town have to be nitrogen-reducing septic systems. So if the voters will not allow us to build sewers, then, at least we'll take the measures that we can to improve things. So I think it's important that's a long-winded answer. I don't apologize for it, but I think it's important that people know what the sort of condition the town is in. And we have structural deficit because of Prop 2.5, so we can't really raise taxes very much either. So it's a beautiful town, a great place to live, and we got all the problems that volunteers can handle.
Thanks so much for that awesome introduction, Bob. And just to go off of what you said earlier about, presenting that first phase, the water and sewer project earlier this year. I mean, how much of that do you attribute to cost versus, other concerns? I'm curious if you can tell us a bit about, what happened there, you think?
I think it is less cost. The town has a conservative bent. We have out of 17, since Proposition 2.5 has passed, we've had 17 attempts at override to reset our tax base. All of those, a couple passed, but all of those have failed. So we have not been able to do that. I think there is sort of a conservative bent and a general sort of distrust of government. If we give them the money, they'll just waste it. That kind of attitude, and it's unfortunate because if you look at if the state will eventually get to us, the state is going to say you have a TMDL limit, you don't meet it. Everybody will have to put a nitrogen-reducing septic system in their homes. Those things are now running $35,000, $40,000. We got 8,000 septic systems. If you do that math in your head, gets to be a very big number. Now the town's not paying it; the individuals are paying it. But if you look at what that sum of money is worth, for us to sewer the north end of the town was estimated at $35 billion. That individual cost is many, many times that. So it's really not a cost issue. It's the people's belief that a solution in which we join together to have a solution isn't worth doing, as opposed to we'll just tough it out and see whether or not we have to have individual solutions. So I think it's someday we will get to the point where when it's facing that $35,000 bill, the sewers are going to look great. Unfortunately, the sewers that now cost $7 million are going to cost $15 million.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Bob. And going off of large infrastructure projects, I'd love to open it up to Vinny. And I'm curious if you could speak to the $70 million upgrade that you guys in Fairhaven. It's one of, if not the largest infrastructure project that you guys have ever engaged in. And I know that these projects cost a ton of money. I'm curious if you can just give me a bit of background as to why you guys did it, how you split up the costs, and how you made this affordable for ratepayers and what other towns can learn from you.
Okay, to start from the beginning, why are we here, first of all? The Clean Water Act in 1972, which was promulgated by Congress, required every wastewater plant to have a biological treatment. What that means in English, in wastewater treatment, we all eat every single day, we all eat different foods. When we go to the bathroom, some of what we discharge rises, some sinks, and some is stubborn in the middle. They're in purgatory. They're not going up, they're not going down, they're stuck. In order to get rid of them, you have to cultivate a live microbiological population. So the folks who work at wastewater plants, they actually are microbiologists to some degree. The right temperature, the right pH, the right oxygen. They grow these critters, the critters swim around, they eat the solids that remain in suspension, they get fat, they sink, that's how you get rid of them. The whole nitrogen, science has revealed, like Corin mentioned, that if there is nitrogen, where does nitrogen come from? Primarily it comes from our urine. If you Google uric acid, it is loaded with ammonia. And ammonia is either ammonia, NH3, or ammonium, NH4, which is a nitrogen attached to either 3 or 4 hydrogen molecules. At any wastewater plant, you certainly go to the bathroom, number one, a lot more times than number two, and that's where the nitrogen comes from. The science in recent times that's revealed that nitrogen is deleterious, like she said. You have, for their body type, if you will, they really usurp a lot of oxygen out of the water, and you have, bad effects on marine life and fish and whatnot. So what we have been forced to do, as part of 1972 Clean Water Act, the EPA came out with a permit system. It's called the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And any entity who discharges not to a sewer, but actually into a U.S. body of water has to have this permit. And the permit has stipulations. Hey, you can discharge, but this is what you have to do. And every 4 years, you're required to reapply for the permit. The last time we applied, we had a nitrogen limit that we never had before, and we would never be able to meet that nitrogen limit without upgrading the plant. Again, in wastewater treatment, things either rise, things either sink, or you have to have a buck. So we have to have a brand new 2-story building with multiple filters to create a condition with the right pH, the right oxygen, the right temperature to grow the nitrogen bacteria removal critters. So that's where we are. We embarked on this venture. We received our latest permit in 2018 after some back and forth with getting legal folks involved. We are under a federal court decree to come into compliance by the end of 2026. So roughly 2 years from now, we have to have compliance. So just like any typical project, we went out to bid. We sought funding from the state. We were able to secure the funding from the state. And as Adam mentioned, it's a $70 million project to date. And we're sharing a portion of that with the town of Mattapoisett. The folks who were sued who live in Mattapoisett, our neighbors to the east, they own roughly 16% of our plant. So when all is said and done, right now we have $12 million in loan forgiveness. We have $12 million, give or take a penny, coming from the town of Mattapoisett. So the town will be on the hook for 40 some odd million. And we are actively pursuing a 0% interest loan, so we only have to pay back the principal. There are some documents that the state requires in order to achieve that, and that's kind of where we are. So we just began, we broke ground earlier this year when the weather broke, so circa March or so, and a couple of years from now, we'll be in nitrogen compliance.
Certainly, Vinny. And just to go off of that, I mean, you talked about acquiring that state funding, and I'm curious to see, I mean, what you think, looking back on, your process of developing your funding sources, seeking, what do you think you did well? And what do you think other towns could learn from in terms of, embarking on similarly large wastewater projects and, selling them to, the ratepayers and sewer users and townsfolk?
Well, you have to have everybody engaged, because in order to get the funding, you have to, where I am, we have town and town meeting, and you have to have it approved by the town meeting. And one of the helpful factors, if you will, is that we were forced to do it. This is not an elective thing. We were forced to do it. We discharge into the New Bedford Inner Harbor. The New Bedford Inner Harbor is nitrogen impaired, not all because of Fairhaven, by the way, but it's nitrogen impaired, and we had to do our part. So, because of the federal requirement and the state being aware of that, that helped, if you will, ease the approval process. And like anything else, a lot of times you have to use local delegation to, move the ball forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Rob, now let's pivot to you. So I understand the town of Dartmouth is, updating its comprehensive wastewater management plan and looking at, your treatment plant. And so there remains some questions about, the Slocum's estuary and what's going on there. I'm curious if you can, speak to those concerns and the efforts that, you guys are taking to, look into the future sewering of your town.
Well, first I want to echo Bob's comment that there's a lot more going on in the town that needs support.
Oh, man.
Than nitrogen. We do have a number of responsibilities in the Public Works Department and the town as a whole, but Public Works empties trash, provides safe roads, provides safe water, as well as provides sewage to most of the heavily developed part of the town. Our sewage treatment plant is 35 years old. It's running up against its capacity, so it's time for us to look at either upgrading and expanding or completely replacing the plant. Anybody in here driving a 35-year-old car? Okay, you get to a point. I used to drive used cars. I've owned 2 new cars in my whole life. One of them I bought 3 years ago. You get to a point where the cost of maintenance is such that it's time to replace the thing. So we are both keeping the plant functioning, but we can see a time when we need a new facility. So we are preparing something called a comprehensive wastewater management plan, updating the one that was last prepared in 2011. That gives us a basis for design, not just the plant itself, but where we want to take sewage from. It also will allow us to look at other strategies in other parts of the town where it may not make sense to extend sewer lines. In some areas, the homes are so widespread, and there is an argument that says that it makes no sense to run a large pipe out there and build pumping stations. So this is part of what the planning process is about. The planning process includes looking at population projections for 30 years. What kinds of development are we going to see? Where is it likely to occur? So we're looking at the collection system, and upgrades to the collection system and expansion, as well as the plant itself. There are a couple of other departments in town, Public Health, Conservation Commission, Planning, Harbor and Waterways, that own a piece of the water quality effort. And so one of the things the comprehensive wastewater management plan is going to do is going to bring those interests together so we can talk to one another, because this needs to be a collaborative process. Whether all of the areas in the Slocum's River watershed are sewered, personally, having thought about it, looking at it, I doubt it. And the reason I doubt it is the nature of the development and the shape of the watershed and the cost of running sewer. So then the question is, what do you do differently for those areas that really do need some nitrogen control? I have a friend, actually more than one, but he likes to use the term science applied. So we look at how the watershed functions in all its dimensions. Where does the water go? What kind of habitats are there? What is the transport and fake mechanism of not just nitrogen, but bacteria and other stuff that move through the watershed? And we try to make intelligent decisions about where to spend the public's money in addressing concerns of the public. So that does not answer your question, but that's what you're going to get at from me for the first time. Okay. Again, I don't know that all areas of the Slocum's River watershed should be sewered. There may be other ways to address various kinds of pollution, including septic system nitrogen.
Absolutely. And I mean, Rob, something that we talked about in our conversation is, the prevalence of other sources of nitrogen, including from impervious surfaces, including from allegedly agriculture. I'm curious if you can speak to, you mentioned, the challenge of engaging the public and stuff like that. And I'm curious if you can kind of make your pitch as to how the public may be able to contribute to, reducing their own contributions.
Well, it's their money. I kind of hope that they're engaged, but like Westport, like Fairhaven, any kind of expenditures that we make go through town meeting. So we need to be sure that the public understands what we're asking for, why it's important, and why it's prudent. And if we can't answer those questions, it's likely that they're going to say, not this year, why don't you come back? And from my perspective, personally, it's important that meetings like this happen, that we address whatever questions come up, and you won't hear bureaucrats say they like the media much, but they're essential. Newspapers, whether they're online or whether you're like me, hold them, television, whatever it is, the word needs to get out. It needs to be clear. It needs to be fact-based. And we want to engage the public and be sure that they understand what we're doing with their money and that they'll help us along by saying yes when we ask for something important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Corin, I just want to revisit a couple of points that have been made among our esteemed panel here. One is the point that Bob made about, the fact that DEP is not going away. I think, we've seen these 4 TMDLs. I mean, obviously there are many nutrient impaired water bodies along the mouth of Buzzards Bay. I'm curious if you can speak to, how certain are we that, we're going to get hit with regulations or a mandate if towns don't take action here?
Sure. So just to review what DEP did out on the Cape. So most of the estuaries out on Cape Cod have this total maximum daily load, this nitrogen limit that communities are required to meet in order to restore water quality, which brings the eelgrass back. So DEP came in and gave the communities a choice. You can either file for a watershed permit and take 20 years to figure out the best way that your community can reduce nitrogen from the watershed and repair water quality. And if you don't do that, we're going to require you to upgrade every septic system in town to best available nitrogen reducing technology. So when DEP initially came out with that last year, they applied it to every waterway that had a TMDL. In the end, they only applied it to Cape Cod. The Cape is farther along in their planning process than we were over here on the South Coast. So DEP gave the South Coast a little bit of a break, some time to put our ducks in a row, so to speak. The most important thing that communities can do on this side of the bay is do this careful, comprehensive wastewater management planning that these communities are doing. Westport did a terrific job with their integrated wastewater management plan and brought in all of their boards, their local communities, and came up with a plan on how to solve this nitrogen problem for Westport. Dartmouth is about to undertake this. So DEP is not going to go away. The most important thing that the communities can do is do this local planning, because the communities want to be in control of the solution. They don't want the state to tell them how to do it. And so I really encourage communities to continue with this local planning. In the meantime, it takes about 12 months to do a good comprehensive wastewater management plan. I say 12 months. Consultants and towns want more time. I'm the advocate. I want it done faster because I want to see cleaner water. But the most important thing that towns can do in the meantime is things like the town of Westport did, was pass a regulation requiring any new construction to install a nitrogen reducing septic system. Towns are about to undertake massive investments in cleaning up a problem that already exists. Continuing to permit new development that's going to add nitrogen pollution to an already large problem doesn't make any sense. And so the investments need to be protected. Somebody once told me, if you're in a hole and you want to get out, the first thing you need to do is stop digging. So I think that DEP is watching closely to see what communities on the South Coast do. If they do nothing, DEP will take action.
Mm-hmm. Corin, going off of that, something that you mentioned, and I think all of our panelists here really mentioned, is the exorbitant costs of these projects, right? $35 million, $70 million. But Rob, I know that we had a conversation. It's going to be more than $50 million at least to, update that wastewater treatment facility. And I know just from speaking with the crowd here and, from speaking, that's a lot of money, especially for some of these towns that are relying on a residential tax base or et cetera. And I'm curious if you can speak to, the role of larger, government intervention here, either from the feds or from the state, and what we need to see on the South Coast to, make these targets a reality.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money for the communities, and the federal government really needs to step up and take some of the burden off the communities that they're facing. Infrastructure costs have gone up 73% in the last 10 years. And so building these infrastructure projects is hugely expensive. Let me back up and say that it's this careful local planning process that will determine ultimately what the solution is. It may not be big municipal sewers for everybody. Big municipal sewers are expensive. They're a really good option when you have densely developed neighborhoods and you already have an existing wastewater treatment facility. That might be the right option. But maybe it's a packaged wastewater treatment plant. Maybe it's a smaller, plant like that's on West Island in Fairhaven, where you have an isolated, neighborhood that you can do a smaller version. And maybe it's inlet widening for some communities. Maybe it's nitrogen reducing septic systems for others. There's a mix of solutions that communities are going to have to evaluate to figure out what is going to meet water quality standards and what is going to be affordable. If it's not affordable, communities are not going to be able to build it, and then we won't have clean water. So we need to figure out how to make it affordable. We need to come up with an affordable plan, and that's on the local communities to figure out the best way to do it. It's on the federal government to come up with the grant money and loan forgiveness to help alleviate some of this burden. And we need to figure out how to regionally spread these costs out. it's too expensive for these communities to solve this problem on their own. If we can regionalize or partner or, figure out a way that we can finance these things together, then it becomes more affordable for every person in those communities.
Great, great. Awesome, you all. This has been a really enlightening conversation. I want to thank you all so much for your contributions so far. And I think we're going to open it up to the audience in terms of hoping to get some of their questions answered. I guess are we going to go hand raising or? Okay. Certainly. So let's start opening this up to the crowd, and I'd love to hear from some of our local audience members.
My name's Susan Spooner, and I am a resident of Fairhaven, 22 years. And I really appreciate what the representative from Westport had to say. And while this might seem punitive, it seems that a small segment of the population in Westport is virtually holding the entire population captive by saying, we don't want to be a part of this. We don't care about it. We want to be on our boat. We want the luxury of being able to sail these beautiful waterways. And we're not going to support trying to make it better for everybody. Now, your population in Westport is what, about 8,000?
The population is 16,600.
So I don't know how big the boating population would be, but seems like a small number of people saying, we have the football, and we don't want you to play. And consequently, I think you take that segment of the population, they all have licenses, so you know who they are, you have to tax the hell out of them. That's punitive, I understand, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of, kickback on something like that, but it's like, stop pandering to these people who want to control. Anyway, that's my point.
Well, I'm not an expert in tax laws, but I don't think we can take names in town meeting and then start fining people for speaking. But there is I've made a lot of pitches and I've made a lot of public presentations over my professional career, and when I presented an overview of the sewer articles at town meeting, and when I stood and looked in the audience, I knew within maybe 10 seconds of speaking that the article was going to fail. The people looked. Almost before I spoke, we knew what the article was. We knew how much money there was, and we knew that we had a loan with forgiveness for the entire amount. We had Senator Keating got us. Congressman Keating got us $1 million, and Senator Rodericks had got us an earmark for $1 million that went into the design. We had the money in hand, and I knew that nobody wanted to hear the argument about what a bargain this was, and within a moment there was a group that said no, we're simply not going to have it. And I think we just need to continue to work. I think the fact that it's there's a difference between losing and being defeated, and you can't. The fact that we didn't win this game, the season is not over. Eventually we've got to play out this season, and eventually we've got to make better arguments. We've got to have better plays, and we're working on making better plays.
Just to add to the conversation, Yes. I'm Carol Steinfeld. I live in Cohasset and South Dartmouth for now. And back in '95, I worked at a civil engineering firm that was dealing with the ratcheting up of Title V, and I saw some of the spoken and unspoken issues. And as it relates to sewering, we can remember that sewering can open up a lot more growth because it detaches lots from soil percolation rate limits. So suddenly that 2-bedroom house can perhaps be made into a 4-bedroom house or larger. And that's being, realtors are very quiet about that on the Cape right now. So sewering has to come with some kind of a recognition of that, and maybe a zoning overlay or some kind of limit if the master plan doesn't accommodate that. And I'd also want to say it'd be great to hear more about any effort to look at exactly what you guys are talking about, where solutions are suited to specific places, and instead of prescriptive solutions, like everyone's going to have a fast system over here, or whatever the system du jour, on-site system du jour is at Vantech, you let those areas figure out how they're going to reduce wastewater, and that opens the door to some of the state-approved ecological systems that grow away the nitrogen. Thanks.
So I'll speak a little bit to the Title V, so the on-site septic systems was used as a zoning regulation back in 1995. So you'd have Title V and you had to have X amount of acres. And so that kind of controlled growth within our communities. When you bring sewer in, those lots can now be smaller. You can put more homes on a lot. You can put them closer to wetlands because you don't have to site a on-site septic system. If you want to avail yourselves of 0% financing for these very large projects, you have to have a zero growth bylaw in town. So you have to figure out that your CWMP has to dictate how much wastewater you are going to, it caps how much wastewater you can produce and accept at a wastewater treatment facility or allow within the watershed. So it really requires you to control growth to mitigate against that project, that problem. And Vinny, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't something like that in Fairhaven on West Island?
Well, twofold, yes. What she was referring to, there's a wastewater treatment plant on West Island. It serves the 400 homes that are located there. When that plant was built 20 some odd years ago, the town entered into a conservation restriction with the state, and it only allowed properties that existed at that time or buildable lots to be able to tie in. So there were 380 allowances regardless of flow, regardless of anything else, because of where the plant was built, where it discharges into, and that the town took over a portion of the land. But just, building upon that, one of the documents that the town of Fairhaven needed in order to get a 0% interest loan. Some folks asked about, the federal government stepping in. These are unfunded mandates. If you're fortunate enough to get some loan forgiveness, and it took literally an act of Congress for Fairhaven to get it, but we got $11-12 million so far. But when the EPA or the state knocks on your door, these are unfunded mandates. That's what it is. You have to do it. But one of the documents that is required in order to get a 0% interest loan, with a loan that we have in Fairhaven, whatever that final tally ends up being, which looks like it's going to be 40 some odd million dollars, the loan rate is either going to be 0%, 2%, or 2.4. It's 2% if you embark on a 20-year amortization, or 2.4 for 30. Either way, if we can successfully achieve 0%, you're looking at a $15 or $20 million savings to the ratepayers in the town just on interest. And that's what I'm actively pursuing. But one of the documents you need is a flow allegation document, because the state wants the warm fuzzy that the money they're lending you, the capacity of the plant will never be exceeded. We're fortunate where we are that my plant is built for 5 million gallons per day. That was the design build back from 50 years ago, and then updated 10, 15 years thereafter, and the town just never saw the growth that was anticipated. So I have a couple of million gallons a day to play with, thankfully. But if I was close to that number, I'd have to be really strict as far as the allocation of future flows, which really, limits your growth. But in order to get the 0%, which I'm heavily invested in, that's what's in front of folks.
I'm Craig Lindell. I live in Dartmouth. I'm sorry. What do I do? Okay. I'm Craig Lindell. I live in Dartmouth. I've been working on watershed and wastewater issues for the last 25 years. And I want to make a brief statement, but I want to
Go ahead.
do a full disclosure first. I own a wastewater treatment business in the north end of the city. I'm sorry. I own a wastewater treatment business in the north end of the city, which is why I've been involved in this. I've been multiple term member of the board of the Coalition for Buzzards Bay. I've worked on this at the Water Environment Federation for 20 years. I think that it can be done much less expensively if you think about changing a code to the watershed standards instead of the point source water pollution control standards. We work with a code that's 50, 60 years old. And the Congress has rejected doing watershed issues. It's passed all of the responsibilities to the state. When we did the watershed, when we did the Clean Water Act, it took less than 3 years from a fire on the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland to creating the EPA, to creating the Clean Water Act and funding it with $40 billion of construction grant money. So we could take 3 years, organize yourselves as communities through the town associations, the municipal associations in Massachusetts, and lobby your legislators to basically create a code. And basically the code is written. There's an amazing amount of work that was done with the watershed agenda. Sorry about that. The documentation is all there. It's been ignored for 28 years. And for example, I think you could do Fairhaven today for probably less than half the price that you did it 20 years ago, because of the technologies that are available and some of the possibilities that are there in the marketplace and now proven in the marketplace.
Panelists care to respond?
Thank you, Craig. So looking at more distributed systems, these packaged treatment plants versus large municipal sewer is definitely something communities need to look at. Maybe, as I said before, maybe large scale municipal sewer doesn't make sense for everybody, but if you can build these packaged treatment plants around town, maybe you can make it more affordable. It's one of the solutions that communities should look at when they're doing the local comprehensive wastewater management plan. Look at what they cost and compare that to the alternatives.
Oh, sure.
Septic systems need to be eliminated. You can't get nitrogen low enough on septic systems to be reasonable. The costs are too high. And in the 1986 report to the Congress, 41 state water quality boards considered septic systems the first or second highest source of groundwater pollution.
Hi, I'm Donna Amaral, and I'm on the Board of Health in Westport. I want to respond to what this woman in the front was referring to in terms of cost and people, the small majority, or the group that might be holding it back. It's not the people who have money. It's the people who don't have money. And I think we have to refer back to the title of this, which is The Cost of a Clean Bay. The cost is what stops people from supporting it. And my experience in the town of Westport is the people who don't have a lot of money are really frightened by the cost of increased taxes. I'm a nurse. I've had a good job. I'm well educated. I have a stable financial situation, but there are a lot of people that don't. And that's what scares them. I mean, if you tell them you're going to have better water and you're going to have better quality of life, because the cost is either a cost in money or a cost in quality of life. I think that if people knew there wasn't a cost to them or it was a minimal cost, they would support it. I think that part of what happened with us in Westport is the communication process wasn't very good. It could have been better. And I think that part of it is, how do you communicate to people? We're talking about communicating with people of all levels of education and understanding, not just to people who are scientists, not just to people who have bachelor's degrees or master's degrees or PhDs. And as a nurse, I find that one of the things I have to do is I have to understand my patient in order to communicate with them so I can get them to do what I want them to do for their own health and well-being. So I think that part of the goal should be, how do you do that to get to the goal? And I think that those with these great minds and these great words that you're using have to think about, how do you change that? Not talk down to people, but talk to them at their level so they understand how this is going to impact them, their children, their grandchildren, and do it in a way that doesn't make them scared that they're going to go bankrupt. So I obviously support all the initiatives that we're trying to accomplish, but I think that we have to think about who we're talking to and go from there. So it's not the wealthy. Actually, the people in Westport who have money are the ones who are really supporting all of this. It's the people that don't have it.
Bob, do you want to respond?
No, I think that's an excellent point. Just to, probably most of you have an idea of Westport, but Westport's development is sort of the way the land looks now is sort of the economy of 100 years ago. So along the streetcar on Route 6, people moved there, but they worked in Fall River in the mills. And so they built what was pretty common at that time. They built on 3,000, 5,000 square foot lots. And they didn't have septic systems, they had outhouses. And now that continued to grow. They've got, it's the largest cluster of cesspools that we still have in function in the town. There's no longer, the streetcar doesn't run there any longer. The jobs are not there. But people who bought their homes in the 50s and 60s are living in the smaller homes in the north, and essentially, any bill is a significant bill to them. We're not insensitive to that issue. And matter of fact, we run a water main in Route 6 now, and we're going to expand that water main. People don't connect to the water because they don't want to get a water bill. They have a well, and even though they're on a lot 50 feet from their neighbor's septic system, in some cases, people drink bottled water but they don't connect to the sewer, to the public water main. And because they don't want to get the water bill, they essentially think that the well is free. So we're very sensitive to that, and the argument of a betterment charge that we had forecasted was around $8,000. That is shocking to people, and they don't weigh the fact that they could face a $35,000 bill to upgrade their septic system. That's off in the future. It may never happen. But if we buy the sewer, you will send me the tax bill.
So, Don McCormick from Dartmouth. I'm one of the people that pushed back on the Mass DEP, mostly because I did read all those reports you discussed. I went through SMAST, I went through the Woods Hole, I looked at the studies, I read all of that information. And just, I brought my little graphics of where nitrogen comes from. In the Westport River system, 57% is from agriculture. That's not controlled by the local communities, that's controlled by the state. So I applaud the local communities trying to build their plans, but a large percentage is not controlled by them. Same on the Slocum River, right? When I looked at that, wastewater is 29%, farm animals, agriculture, golf courses at 36%. So that's not within the control of Dartmouth, not in the control of Westport. So I'm wondering how these reports or these studies are going to solve this problem in the long term. I'm also was very skeptical on the data because it was so old. I was skeptical on the data because nobody has taken my septic system and shown me how pervious what did you call the word? Transporting from my house to the watershed. I'm all for it. I can afford it. That's not a problem. But there's a lot of people in my neighborhood that can't. So I want to make sure the science is right, because when I read through the load reports and how much it contributes and how much you need to lower it to get the nitrogen out of the waterway, septic is a small portion of that. And I worry that we spend all this money to lower the septic system contribution, but really make no difference at all in what the water quality is and the nitrogen reduction. Statement, I guess not a real question, but.
No, that's all right. It's actually a good segue. In every watershed, in every sub-watershed, the sources of any pollutants, whether it's bacteria, phosphorus, nitrogen, it's a different profile. And some of these things are amenable to putting in a septic system or putting in a sewer system and basically taking them out of the watershed. That's what you're doing, treating them and putting that effluent somewhere else. The other sources have to be controlled by the people who own the properties, whether it's picking up after your dog or paying attention to the amount of nutrients in the soil as an agricultural interest, or from any of the other sources. A lot of this is going to come down to whether the community gets serious on an individual level about making a difference. All right. Now, among the things I've done in my life is work with big agriculture out west, and quite often, even though they claim to be stewards of the land, and in fact they are, what motivates them is whether they can save money and do better. So if part of the education of the community is to teach golf courses, people who like green lawns, people who are growing things for a living, that they only need so much fertilizer, including nitrogen fertilizer, and you can convince them that there's an easy way to use the minimal amount that they actually need, and therefore reduce the amount that's being transported over land or through groundwater. that helps solve that problem, reduce that problem. But there's going to be more to this than the actual dollar cost of changing over septic systems. There's going to have to be a change in people's behavior. That's going to happen because individuals decide it's worth doing things differently. Okay, so that your point is well taken. I made the same points when we all made comments. So that's really the reason to do the comprehensive wastewater management plan. It's not just to be able to qualify for low interest loans and to learn what you need to do for the big projects. It's to engage the community in understanding all of the different things that the community can do better.
First of all, you control agriculture, right? The state Department of Agriculture does. The composting that was in Westport, along the Westport River, when I was in Dr. our house, we had to fight that with the state.
Yeah, and
Composting, because that was a bigger contributor than probably all the septic systems.
And in the main, even though the state may regulate agriculture, it really does come down to the grower to do the right thing, and usually it's for economic reasons. So you have to, there were comments earlier about people's different perspectives, and you have to meet people where they are. That's a lesson I've learned about dealing with growers. You know, you gotta have a conversation that's a little different than perhaps some of our friends who are involved directly in environmental groups and have a different perspective.
My name's John Bullard. I'm on the Westport Planning Board and with Bob Daler. And thank you all for this. I wanted to address the issue of, from a political standpoint. And I really appreciate what Donna Amaral talked about in terms of, and Mr. Almy was getting at this too, in terms of how we communicate with people. Because I think this is important, and believe me, right here at the Kilburn Mill, I come here with some scars because you may think we're at the Kilburn Mill or in the South End, but I think we're in 6A and 6B because I'm Vinny's smiling. I'm the former mayor because the sewer plant down at the South End is what I put down there, and the people in the South End in 6A and B made me the former mayor because of the sewer plant. And I lost the election by 390 votes, but 6A and B, I lost by 690 votes. So I love 6A and B, and I never forget it, even though it was half a century ago. Politics is, environmental decisions have consequences. And Adam, you asked Bob, was it the issue of cost or was there something else, which was a very good question. And Donna was getting at the issue of people don't care what you know unless they know that you care. And I think that's really important. And that's what Bob was getting at about the votes in Westport, because we have a really nice police station and a fire station and a school. But it's tough making the argument for wastewater. And Vinny talked about the beginning of this with the Clean Water Act. When they passed the Clean Water Act, they also passed 90% funding to build everything. And then Vinny talked about the TMDLs are really unfunded mandates, And nothing gets a local officials a backup more than those two words, unfunded mandates. And so that is something that we have to think about, and that's why I want to get to the issue of the political aspect of this, and why I want to congratulate you, Adam, on the article, because what you pointed out by looking at Westport all the way to Wareham is how these costs are clearly way beyond ratepayers, taxpayers' ability to pay. There's just no way you can do that. And if we think about it from just Westport's point of view, or just Fairhaven's point of view, it's just, we can't solve the problem that way. When you look at your article, Adam, then you realize it's not even a state issue. It's a federal issue, the same way the Bourne and Sagamore bridges are federal issues. This has to be a much bigger pie. And that's why I'm saying it's about how do we get a strategy that makes a bigger pie. And how do the people on the dais, how does the coalition start to raise the visibility of this? It's easier with schools and bridges because these are things you can cut ribbons for. These are things that people like to have their names attached to. It's a lot harder when you're talking about wastewater. And we haven't even talked about the CSOs. He's got Dale Levitt here who can tell you about the consequences of, what happens when you don't treat CSOs. And so that's the challenge, and I'm interested in Corn's take or anyone's take on how we start to elevate the cause as a region so that Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey start to say, just as they would for the Sagamore and Bourne bridges, this is something I'm going to go to bat for, because in all the time I've been dealing with wastewater, it's pretty hard to get people to say, oh, wow, I want to go to bat for wastewater. So any ideas on how we get people to do that, I'm all ears.
Mr. Mayor, first, thanks for being here. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the work you've done. You've been involved in NOAA. You understand that NOAA recognizes this as a resource. It seems to me that that is a place to start leveraging interest at the federal level. If Buzzards Bay is a federally recognized resource, then it seems to me somebody at NOAA would need to pick this up and say, yeah, okay, and partner with us. So then we have local, state, and federal interests all singing the same song, if you will.
And I'll just add on to that. So just as an example of what Cape Cod did as DEP came down on them with their regulations, the Cape knew this was coming, and a couple of years ago, they put a surcharge on their short-term rentals across the Cape, and they created a very large pot of money which gives 25% grants to communities to do wastewater projects, whether it's sewer projects, whether it's a packaged treatment plant, whether it's individual nitrogen producing septic systems, but it's a substantial amount of money that communities are cutting their costs by 25%, and in some instances by half. John is right that we need to get very creative on how we come up with a pot of money to help offset these costs for the communities, because he's right. Solving these on an individual basis is near impossible. And elevating this, it is a top priority of the coalition to elevate this to our federal delegation and making that a stronger delegation so that we get the federal funds that communities need to solve this problem. So I think it's a federal strategy. It's also a state strategy. What type of creative financing can we do on the South Coast to create a big pot of money that we can all share to solve this problem?
John, you learned the lesson that we over and over again, we all learn everybody wants clean water, but nobody wants to live next to the treatment plant, right? You know, that the idea that there is the possibility, and people have been beginning discussions in Westport about thinking about a regional solution, looking at Fall River. Fall River currently serves water and wastewater services to the north end of Tiverton. North end of Tiverton looks like the north end of Westport. You know, it was more densely developed around Fall River. They also extend a sewer into Freetown. So if you know the Fall River, up 24, the Fall River Industrial Park, and then where Stop and Shop and all of that is in Freetown. So they currently have intermunicipal agreements on water and wastewater. And so if we look at that, there's an opportunity where there's capacity that's been already sitting there invested largely with public monies, and can we capitalize that in sort of a lower Taunton River basin? You know, if you think about at the west end of Bristol County, you've got Taunton as a potential city. I mean, a city in the upper portions of the basin. You've got Fall River at the mouth of the river and on Mount Hope Bay. Sort of looking at that as regional capacity. If you look at the size of both of the South Watuppa Pond, which was the old mill water resource, and the North Watuppa Pond, which was the drinking water, those are really sizable reservoirs for this part of the state. And like New Bedford's water supplies up in the lakes in Lakeville, you could picture regional solutions where there's already been a public investment in the larger cities that would benefit the surrounding towns. And there may be some way of reducing costs by having that. Capitalize on the capacities that have already been purchased with essentially, you know, cheaper dollars. I know it's taxpayers' money, but you know, the cost to build something 20 years ago is a lot less than the cost to build now. Upgrading that, using that capacity is something we can do. There's ways of exploring that. Takes a little broader thinking. In our case, since we touch Rhode Island, takes real broad thinking, in which we got different congressmen, we've got different senators, but maybe we parlay those votes together to create sort of a regional solution.
Hey, y'all, we got time for 4 more questions. I think this has been really great. Just want to turn it over and as concise as you can with the questions, please. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Dan Turner, and I live in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. Been there for 24 years. I've also been treating wastewater for over 40 years. I've been involved in the Chesapeake Bay Initiative, Narragansett Bay Initiative. He started way back in 2004, 2005. There's been a lot of treatment plants that have been upgraded through various ways. We're way behind the game here in the South Coast. The Buzzards Bay is needing to have something addressed, and it's a regional problem. It's not a town problem. You have to look at the entire region. We're also coming from different types of geography, if you will. Cape Cod is different from the South Coast. Cape Cod is a big sandbar. So when you have septic systems, the septage is going to travel further than in this area. So we have to take a look at this area as well. When we look at these kinds of issues with total nitrogen, you have to take a look at the total mass daily load of each specific area. And you handle those loads from the highest load to the smallest load. So basically you want to remove the bulk of the total nitrogen first and work your way down. It just makes the most sense. When you look at what's going on here, we have a lot of talk about septic systems. This gentleman here was talking about the concern based on all of the information from the Mass DEP. In fact, Dartmouth is 14% when you really look at the numbers of the total nitrogen for septic and wastewater. A lot of it's impervious types of surfaces, runoff. When you look at the Slocum River watershed, you have a lot of impervious surfaces that are contributing as well. Matter of fact, the impervious surfaces equates that to wastewater. At 13%, farm animals 6%, agricultural fertilizer 4%, lawn and golf course fertilizer 7%, landfill. Now there's compost piles as well. This all adds up. You have to look at a broad scope of where the total nitrogen is coming from, and then put together a plan that is going to address it. Now, right here, Mr. Mayor, I thank you for what you did, the work on the wastewater treatment plant, but that wastewater treatment plant does not treat for total nitrogen. To treat for total nitrogen, you have to go through a nitrification process first, which is essentially an aerobic process, followed by an anoxic process, or a combination thereof, where you then denitrify the wastewater. The New Bedford plant contributes the most load to the Buzzards Bay area. Without a doubt. CSOs are also contributing. That's raw sewage. Every time it rains, raw sewage is discharged right into Clark's Cove and all of this area. It has to be addressed. On top of that, we have all of the other areas that you have to really look at why we have an issue. For example, the Slocum's River. That watershed has been building up shoaling over the years from the Westport, the Gooseberry Neck Causeway has slowed that water flow down. It's shoaling in front of that embayment for the Slocum's River. If that was dredged, you'd have better flow coming off of the Slocum's River. So my question is, why aren't we looking at the total mass daily load initiatives that need to be taking place to look at this seriously, rather than putting it on septic tank facilities in houses and things of that nature at $30,000 to $60,000 each, when it may not have that much of an impact, when we really need to be serious about what's going on and being discharged into the bay.
You answered your question.
Next question. Oh, do you want to respond?
All right. So a couple of responses. Thank you for your comments. You're absolutely, your description on how you take care of nitrogen and wastewater treatment is spot on. You have to add oxygen and then you have to take it away. And that's how you get rid of the nitrogen in a wastewater process. Just a couple of clarifying points. New Bedford discharges out into a deep well flush part of Buzzards Bay. And so the coalition collects water quality data up and down the bay. And we have stations out where New Bedford, the city of New Bedford discharges. And Right now, we are not seeing, it is so well flushed out there that we're not seeing, pardon the pun of the well flushed, we're not seeing a nitrogen signal. We're not seeing an increase of nitrogen and an impact of nitrogen at that discharge location. Same with the town of Dartmouth's discharge, which discharges out into a well flushed part of the bay. With respect to Slocum's River and Westport, we're looking at these shallow inner estuaries because that's what's first receiving everything that's coming off the land. So it's the upper reaches, it's the Pascamanset, it's the upper Westport River, it's inner New Bedford Harbor, it's the Agawam River and the Wareham River. These are where we're actually getting the most nitrogen and it's having the largest impact. And so that's why the communities have to look locally on how to solve that problem, whether it's impervious surfaces, whether it's septic systems, whether it's fertilizer. So I'm looking at the DEP reports now, and for Slocum's River, the local controllable largest source is wastewater at 29%. Impervious surface is also at 29% for the town of Dartmouth and Slocum's River. So those are the two largest sources that are impacting the Slocum's River, not Buzzards Bay wide, but the Slocum's River. So those are the two sources that the town needs to target. So I just wanted to clarify that, yes, we have to look at the bay wide, but the city of New Bedford's discharge is not impacting the Slocum's River or other near shore estuaries.
Sure. Next question.
Directly from the Mass DEP report. So this is not fictitious.
Oh, I think probably the graphic that you're looking at might be all sources. The one I'm looking at is only locally controllable. So I think yours probably has atmospheric deposition added to it. And so another important source of nitrogen is atmospheric deposition of nitrogen. And so that's where nitrogen comes from rainfall. So the burning of fossil fuels creates nitrogen in the atmosphere. It comes down as atmospheric deposition. That is from the Midwest of the country. It is not something that we can control here on the South Coast. It's an important source, but it's not something that we can control. So I'll just leave that there.
Yeah, go ahead. Just to echo what the former mayor said, back in 1987, a third-party interest group, the Conservation, Vinny from Fairhaven is going to put his New Bedford hat on for a sec. So the Conservation Law Foundation of New England in 1987 actually prodded the EPA to impose the Clean Water Act on New Bedford. When New Bedford's plant went online in '74, it did not have the microbiological population requirement that was spelled out in the Clean Water Act. So that plant went online in '96. That was one of the newest plants, if not the newest plant in the whole country. And nitrogen was not a parameter of concern at the newest plant in the country 28 years ago. So that's why that can't, again, like I said a little while ago ad nauseum, in wastewater treatment, things either rise, things either sink based on the specific gravity of that particular particle in the water, or it gets eaten by a bug. The bugs that, what the gentleman mentioned, nitrification and denitrification, what that is in English is you're taking the ammonia that we pee out, and through a microbiological process, you convert from ammonia with a set of critters called nitrosomonas, and that converts NH4 to NO3, which is nitrate. And then another set of critters convert nitrate ultimately to nitrogen gas, what's emitted to the atmosphere. That's what we're going through right now in Fairhaven. And the little critters that remove wastewater on a general daily basis only take 12 hours to do their job. They need a little bit of oxygen. The pH is, 6 to 9, 5 to 9. The critters who do the nitrification, they want to be in San Diego. It's got to be 72 degrees. The pH is much more limited, like between 7 and 8. The oxygen content is much higher, and that's why New Bedford can't nitrify right now, just because that was not a parameter of concern, way back when.
I'll also add, not to continue on that point, but New Bedford is also currently looking into denitrification technology at the plant. I know that they're in the early planning stages of that, and that was mentioned to me in their comments. Next question?
Actually, if I may, I'd like to follow up on the gentleman's comments. Earlier, I mentioned something called science applied, and basically that means trying to understand how a watershed or sub-watershed functions. And functioning means how it transports and changes the chemistry of water, what the biology is, how all of those things interact, including carbon exchange and all of the other stuff that's in the water, because it's much, much more than just nitrogen. And Vinny and I were both called off our presentations tonight. I happen to bring some of mine. So I'm just going to run quickly through what I think of science applied for nitrogen, and this would apply to in the Slocum's watershed. Do we understand all the nitrogen sources, natural and human caused? Your point. Do we understand pathways and fate of nitrogen as it moves through the entire watershed? How is it transported through shallow groundwater? What kind of attenuation is due to soil, bacteria, and plants, and in particular wetlands? And what is the impact of carbon cycling in the watershed on nitrogen levels? Those are the critters that we use artificially to treat a lot of water, but they're out there in the environment. Do we understand all the impact, all the factors in nitrogen impacts, that is seasonal flow and also tidal exchange, which is a big deal? And, you know, I'm not a chemist, a little bit of a chemist, but I'm also a coastal geologist. And I look at the Slocum's River watershed and I hear stories from my family of almost 100 years ago sailing boats up into that watershed. I've tried to take a boat that takes 2.5 feet of water and I won't go in there, okay, even at high tide. And I see fishermen standing on the sandbar, people taking horses out there. This is a different estuary than even perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. So we need to understand those things, and the idea is to be certain before we commit a lot of public money in going in a certain direction. And I realize that sounds like you're kind of putting stuff off, right? We don't have to do this right now. That's not the point. The point is to understand it before you move forward. You need a microphone.
Next question.
Oh, I think we're trying to wrap up.
2 more questions? Go ahead, Dale.
Thanks, Adam. So my name is Dale Levitt, and I'm a co-owner of Blue Stream Shellfish, and we grow oysters in Fairhaven. Thanks, John, for the pitch, but I'm not going to talk about CSOs tonight, even though we are closed once again to harvest. What I would like to do is point out that there are other ways of mitigating nitrogen in our environment, and one of the ways that I obviously would be a proponent of is using shellfish resources for nitrogen mitigation. It's not the solution, but it's a part of the solution. And so I wonder if anybody would like to make comments about that.
I was fortunate enough to work on a project years ago down in the Chesapeake. And part of the project was to deliberately build shallow reefs, seed them with oysters for nitrogen and bacteria control. An example, I agree with you.
Last question?
Sure. My name's Tony Sapienza. I live in Dartmouth, and I live right across Clark's Cove, so my lawn probably contributes to the nitrogen in Clark's Cove. My simple question is this, and by the way, I am a golfer and I don't own any shares of Scott's Turf Builder, but why don't we just ban nitrogen fertilizers, whatever that percentage is? And I don't want to get into the science of whether it's 30% or 20% or 5%. Let's just do the small thing that we can do, which is stop using nitrogen fertilizers in the town of Dartmouth, and in the town of Fairhaven, and in the town of Westport. Simple question.
Oh, go ahead, take it away.
So you're absolutely right. Lawn fertilizers is the only source of nitrogen that we are voluntarily putting on our yards. It's not a necessity. We're doing it because we want a green law. Unfortunately, the state passed a law a few years ago which prevented local communities from regulating lawn fertilizers. And so we would support legislation that allowed communities, if they so chose, to ban lawn fertilizers or the sale of lawn fertilizers in their communities. But right now, states aren't going to let the local communities do it.
If I could, that comes back to individual actions. I'm not a lawn guy, so I'm going to be real careful about saying anything. But here, whether you're regulated or not, it comes down to being careful about how you use any chemicals, whether you pick up after your dog, whether you keep your septic system in good shape. You know, they do require a certain amount of maintenance, and all the other things that we humans do to change the world we live in. And so I think that one of the things that years ago I advocated out on the Cape was to have public information pamphlets available at all the places that sold fertilizer that explain the impact of too much fertilizer and how to figure out how to use just enough. So.
And also, I think there's a real possibility you can have a lawn if you want, but you can't run your lawn right down to the edge of the water and the river.
Fantastic, everyone. Thank you so much for all of you coming out and attending. I just want to give our panelists one last minute to talk a bit about, wait. There's be plenty of time for that. I'll take some too. But I just wanted to go through my line of panelists and just ask them, obviously some closing thoughts and comments and, your thoughts on the role for the public in this conversation. We talked about, making this a regional issue. And I'm curious as to, what, people in the audience and, everyday residents of your towns can do to, help engage this nitrogen pollution and tackle it head on and restore the water quality of Buzzards Bay, and what you guys think would be useful. Bob, let's just start with you and go down.
Well, I think it's, my takeaway from the comments is we need to do a much better job at educating people and opening up conversations with people about why do this? What is the real need? And then figuring out how we can afford to have solutions.
Yeah, I'm of the opposite mindset. I have to pay back for a treatment plant, so I'm hoping people flush twice, actually. But all kidding aside, no, I think we have to there are folks here obviously educated, they're interested, and this is a great target audience, but the folks who aren't as aware need to be made aware, because, and just to, echo something that was said before, in the position that I have to balance both. I have to comply with the federal mandate and update the plant as required. And of course, the environmentalist in me wants to do that. But I also have to take into consideration my ratepayers as well. Before we had to increase the rates to pay back this loan, roughly I was taking about $4 million annually in my wastewater budget. $1 million was going towards projects and $3 million was between operation and just salaries, general expenses. And now if I have to pay back a couple of $1 million, which is why I'm actively pursuing a 0% interest, I nearly have to double the rates. So that is very much in the back of my mind why I'm seeking, we were fortunate enough to get loan forgiveness, and why I'm actively pursuing 0%, because while I need to be an environmentalist, I also have to make it affordable for the people who live in the town. And that's the balance you have to do.
My sense is very process-oriented. I think the bottom line is we need to really consider where we want to go and collaborate. And so this meeting and meetings like this at a town and even perhaps at a neighborhood level are essential. I think we need to have an agreement for the basis for planning. How long a horizon? What do we want our community to look like? And then what kind of services do we want to provide? Because if you don't have a sense of what you want your community to look like, how are you going to plan services, right? And this is my point to criticize land use planning in Massachusetts. I'll just say it. I think we need to understand how these watersheds function and set goals for what we want in water quality, habitat, and human recreation, so that we know what we're trying to correct and what we're trying to protect. We need, at the town level, we need to dedicate the kind of resources to do this work, whether it's volunteers or whether it's paid professional staff. There is not the capability to do most of this stuff in some of the towns, Dartmouth included. We're kind of siloed, and we need somebody to bring all that together. We need performance standards and regular reports. In other words, we're going to ask the public for money. We need to tell you on a regular basis what we're spending the money on and what kind of progress we're making. And I'm going to use an older term here. This is adaptive management. You don't exactly know where you're going to go, but with the interaction between the people who are sort of helping to run the show and the public, you make adjustments as you're going along. It's kind of like sailing.
Thank you, Adam. I want to thank the community for coming out and expressing your opinions. Very valuable feedback. I'll start with clearly we all need to do a better job communicating the problem and talking to people where they live and from their perspectives. It is a challenge to talk about wastewater and why it's important to the community. We all live on septic, a lot of us live on septic systems, which we built once and then we forgot about them for 30 years until we have to rebuild it again. So getting people to care about wastewater is super important, and we need to figure out how to do it and do it well. And we also need to make it affordable. So we need to understand how to communicate with people to make them care about the resources and care that wastewater is important. And we also need to figure out how to make wastewater projects, whether it's a septic system, whether it's more oyster farming, whether it's a municipal wastewater treatment facility, we need to make it affordable. And so the coalition is going to continue to create state strategies and federal strategies to bring money to communities on a regional basis. We're also here to help plan with communities. We can offer technical assistance. When there's a town meeting vote, we can get our members out and support sewer articles or septic articles or whatever the article is that reduces nitrogen to our nearshore waters.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure to have you. If you have any further questions, I believe our panelists will stick around for a few minutes to, chat about solutions and further discuss the nitrogen problem. Thank you all so much for coming. And the video will be online in a few days. So through our website. Yes, correct. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great job.